We are now transitioning to our first plenary, and I have the distinct privilege of introducing our presenter, who is a fellow member of the editorial community, so maybe that's why they asked me to introduce her. But Dr. Gina Zurlo is editor of World Christian Database, and her research intersects world Christianity, history, sociology of religion, and women's studies. She is also a visiting scholar at Boston University's Institute on Culture, Religion, and World Affairs, where she edits the World Religion Database, Brill. Her most recent books include Global Christianity, A Guide to the World's Largest Religion, From Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, a Zondervan publication, Women in World Christianity, Building and Sustaining a Global Movement, from Wiley Blackwell, and From Nairobi to the World, David B. Barnett, and the Re-Imaging of World Christianity. She was named one of the BBC's 100 Most Inspiring and Influential Women of 2019 for her work in quantifying the religious future. So would you give a round of applause for our presenter, Dr. Gina Zurlo?
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I'm just going to get myself situated. All right. Thank you for coming to my city. I am so excited, and I'm so delighted to have received this invitation from the NCC to celebrate your 75 years. I'm a big believer in the ecumenical movement. I'm delighted that you're here in Boston. I attend Christ Church Episcopal Church of Hamilton Wenham, and I also bring you greetings from Harvard Divinity School, where I'm a senior researcher and lecturer in world Christianity. And today we're going to talk about our global Christian family, trends in world Christianity for 21st century ecumenism. And so what we're going to look at a little bit this morning is a little bit of history of counting. It won't be boring, I promise. And then we'll look at some global Christian trends, some important issues for Christians today, and end with some reflections on ecumenism in world Christianity. So I want to start with this quote to consider from my friend and colleague Longsankima Pachuao, who is a theologian from Northeast India. And he said, "Christianity exists between the universal claim of its message and the particular way of practicing the faith." So I want us to keep this in mind as we journey through world Christianity together. So let's start with history, because you can't know where you're going unless you know where you have come from. So our story begins with David Barrett, who was an Anglican missionary with the Church Missionary Society. And David Barrett was British, and he was an aeronautical engineer. And he was working for the British Royal Aircraft Establishment after World War II. But the aircraft establishment assigned him to bomb design, so designing planes to drop bombs on people. But David Barrett was a pacifist and didn't want to design planes that killed people, so he became a missionary and a priest instead. So these are our career options: bomb design or missionary priest. Fair, right? So in 1957, he ends up in Nyanza province, Kenya, when the largest schism from the Anglican Church, led by Africans, was happening. And so David Barrett, being a scientifically minded guy, he started to count. He started to count all the new Christians in Kenya, and then expanded his analysis to East Africa, to Sub-Saharan Africa, and then eventually the whole world. So these are actual passport pages from David Barrett's passports that we have in the archives, and he traveled to 212 countries searching for data. There was only around 223 countries in the world at the time. So he goes to almost every single country of the world looking for data. He's talking to ecumenical leaders. He's talking to missionaries on the ground. He's going to particular people groups and asking to talk to the oldest Christian among them to get an oral history of how Christianity came to be. And in doing so, he developed this local global method of trying to pair what's happening on the ground in religious change with what we know from big global data sets. Now, he's doing this at a very interesting time in the 20th century. So this social scientist, Peter Berger, very famously in 1968 said that by the year 2000, religious believers will be huddled together in small groups trying to resist a worldwide secular culture. It was all very dramatic, right? God was dead and religion was declining, and there would be no more religion by the turn of the 21st century. David Barrett, however, was in Africa, and he's looking around thinking, this looks like a pretty religious place to me. And so David Barrett in 1970 published an article where he said, there will be 350 million Christians in Africa by the year 2000. Now, of course, David Barrett was right, and Peter Berger was wrong. There was actually 360 million Christians in Africa by the year 2000. And in a beautiful example and very rare example of academic humility, Peter Berger famously recanted his position in 1997 and said, I think what I and most other sociologists of religion said in the 1960s was a mistake. In 1982, David Barrett came out with the World Christian Encyclopedia, first edition, which was the first truly ecumenical and interreligious project that had ever existed, essentially. It was the first global census of every religion in every country of the world, and then Christianity at the denominational level. So this was the first book to quantify Catholics, Orthodox, all different kinds of Protestants, Pentecostals, evangelicals, all those new African independent churches, together in one analysis, no theological differences between them. If you self-identify as a Christian, you are counted as such. And it was also the first time anyone had counted the number of Muslims in the world, the number of atheists in the world, right? So it was this real ecumenical spirit behind this project. The analysis was updated for the second edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia in 2001, and then I had the honor and the privilege of writing the third edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia, which came out in 2019, and I was privileged to give a copy to Pope Francis at the Vatican 40 years after David Barrett gave a copy to John Paul II. Thank you. Thank you. So now that we have a new pope, I got to write another big book, I'm told. So I'm working on that. So the history, just to show, is an example to show you of where all the data come from that I'm about to show you. So I'm the next generation of David Barrett's work as editor of the World Christian Database. And what I'm doing is combining this local global perspective. We really very much care what's happening on the ground in Christian communities as we track these trends. So let's look at some trends in global Christianity from 1900 to our projections to 2075, which really is not that far away if you think about it. Okay, so this is what we call, in official statistical terms, a boring line graph. And this is where anyone who invited me to come today is thinking, oh my God, what have we done? So what this graph shows you is about a third of the world was Christian in the year 1900, about a third of the world is Christian today, and about a third of the world will probably be Christian in the future. That's it, game over. No, not game over, because what this graph hides is the most dramatic transformation of almost any religion at any point in human history. So at the beginning of the 20th century, 82% of all Christians lived in what the United Nations calls the global north, which is Europe and North America, and only 18% of Christians lived in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. Now, nobody blink, because we're going to skip to today. Now, this is what world Christianity looks like now, where only 31% of Christians live in the global north, and 69% of Christians live in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Oceania. This is a fundamentally different Christian world than, frankly, my grandparents knew, and frankly, even that my parents are aware of. So Christianity is shifting. And if we expand the analysis to 2075, we anticipate that 83% of all Christians in the world will live in the global south. This could not be a more dramatic change from that of our predecessors. If you look at the graph at the bottom, this is the makeup of Christianity by continent. So in 1900, 68% of Christians were Europeans, but by 2075, 47% of Christians will be Africans. Are we responding to the demographic shift of global Christianity? So this is a map I could spend the rest of my life talking about, which is the percent Christian by province worldwide. So the darker the blue, the higher concentration of Christians. The lighter the blue, the lower concentration of Christians. And remember, Christian here is self-identification. If you call yourself a Christian, you are counted as such. This is not a map of who believes in God or who goes to church or who reads their Bible. This is a map of self-identification as a Christian. So you can see Europe, for example, is still really dark blue because a lot of people are still baptized into churches, and then they are counted as such as Christians, whether or not they actually believe the tenets of the faith or attend church. Other people do that kind of work. I do this work. This is self-identification. So you can see lots of Christianity, North America, Latin America, Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Oceania as well. And I like the detail of this. I know it's hard to see, but you can see Northeast India. There are some dark blue provinces. Even though India is a majority Hindu country, you have these majority Christian provinces, 95% or more Christian in Northeast India. So you can see differences that emerge around the world. So global Christianity consists of 2.6 billion Christians, which are made up of what we call 4 major Christian traditions, which are Catholics, you've heard of those, Orthodox, you've heard of those, Protestants, you've heard of those, and then independents are Christians who do not self-identify as Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant. So that includes, for example, the African independent churches, some third-wave charismatic churches, LDS, Jehovah's Witness, they count themselves as Christians, they're in the independent category. And then within the 4 major Christian traditions, you have 2 movements, which are evangelicals and Pentecostal charismatics. So you can mix and match the 4 and the 2. You can be a Catholic charismatic, you can be a Pentecostal evangelical, you can be an independent evangelical charismatic. So that's how the taxonomy works. So we can look at world Christianity from this perspective by its major Christian traditions, where the pink color is majority Catholic. So you can see a lot of the states in the US, Central America, Latin America, majority Catholic. When you think of the Catholic Church, though, do you think of the Democratic Republic of the Congo? Good, okay. You are the only people who do, apparently. That is amazing. The DRC has had the fastest growing Catholic population in the world for the last 50 years. So this is something the Catholic Church needs to think about with a center in Rome, but the demographic weight elsewhere. We have the dark purple color for independence. You can see China and India really come to the fore there. For China, it's the underground house church movement, both Catholic and Protestant. They are not connected to historic Protestantism. They're counted as independent. You have Orthodox populations, mostly concentrated in Eastern Europe, but of course historic populations in Egypt, Ethiopia. And then you have the green, which is Protestantism. You can see a smattering of Protestants around the world. There's 2 of my favorite things about this map. One is that you can see the Bible Belt in the US come out really clearly with all the Protestants there. That is so cool that it comes out in the data. And then my other favorite thing is that Texas is independent. I just feel like that fits, right? And it's because of all the mega churches that are in Texas. They are technically independent, so it comes out in the map. Isn't data awesome? Love it. It is, right? So if we look at these traditions over time, so here's a line graph from 1900 with our projections to 2075. Roughly half of all Christians are Catholic, a quarter are Protestant, 16% independent, 11% Orthodox. And you can see a tremendous growth of evangelicalism, Pentecostal charismatic, and independent Christianity. So wherever Christianity spread in the 20th century, those traditions spread with it. Okay, let's take a quick trip around the world and look at some key trends by continent. So here is Africa. We've got our Christian map, which is the blue, and then our religion map, where you see green, which is Islam in the north, meet Christianity from the south along the Sahel. So you end up with a country like Nigeria that is nearly 50-50 split between Muslims in the north, Christians in the south. Africa was only 9% Christian in the year 1900, and now it's 49% Christian. In many ways, this represents the new demographic center of global Christianity. And by the year 2075, the Democratic Republic of the Congo will replace the United States as the country with the most Christians. And Nigeria will be number 2. And then the US will be number 3. We really need to rethink the place of the United States in world Christianity. Moving on to Asia, which is always so pretty because of its religious diversity. Look at this beautiful map. So Asia, of course, is the most religiously diverse place, with many of the world's religions having been founded in Asia, including our own, Christianity, in the Middle East. So you've got green is Islam, the pink color for Hinduism, Buddhism, you have non-religion in China, ethnic religions all over. We've got even some Christian majority places. I want to learn from Asian Christians what it means to live as a Christian in a religiously diverse context, because they're the ones who have always done it. I don't want to learn from white Americans about how to live in religious diversity. I want to learn from Asian Christians on how to do it, because that has been their existence of living with their neighbor, friend, colleague, partner of another faith. Looking at trends in Europe, you can see that Christianity is, of course, on the decline in Europe. But I don't want the decline narrative to take over our understanding of religiosity in Europe. Because what this map and this graph doesn't show you is every major European city has large migrant populations of Christians that are fundamentally changing the religious landscape of Europe. Now, these churches are extremely hard for me to find. And really the only way you can do it is kind of on foot, frankly. And there are groups who have done this. The Center for the Study of World Christianity at Edinburgh University in Scotland went on foot in Edinburgh looking for migrant communities of Christians, and they uncovered dozens and dozens and dozens of vibrant groups in a, quote, post-Christian secular city. So we need to rethink what it means to be Christian in Europe in light of migration. Next up is Latin America, which of course has been a majority Catholic country due to 500 years of Catholic colonization and supremacy. So 80% of Christians in Latin America are Catholics, but 20% are evangelicos, not Catholic. And so that was one of the major changes in the 20th century, was the growth of non-Catholic Christianity in the 20th century. So we need to think really seriously about especially these neo-Pentecostal groups, especially in Brazil. There's a lot of them in Brazil that are spreading worldwide. And every time that we do denominational research on Christianity, they multiply. So there's Brazilian migrant churches all over the world now. So that's something for us to keep in mind. North America, where most of us live. So North America, of course, Canada, and the United States, most of the demographic weight there. North America is becoming more religiously diverse, which is why we should be looking to Asian Christians for guidance on what it means to live in religious pluralism. We do see the rapid decline of Christianity in North America, but again, it's the migration story and it's the demographic nuance that we need to consider. Christianity in North America is not declining equally. So it's mostly white Christianity that is declining, whereas Black Christianity, Hispanic Christianity, Asian American Christianity is either growing or at stasis. So we hear again this decline narrative, but who is actually declining? And up until very recently, it was migration from Latin America that was keeping the United States as the country with the most Christians. Well, now that our borders are practically closed, we will see a decline, a much more rapid decline of Christianity in this country, which could be the opposite of what is intended by some in our government. And last but never least is Oceania, which is made up of Australia, New Zealand, and then the Pacific Islands, Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, which are really hard to map. I mean, but there are islands there, if you can see them. So this is a really interesting region of the world because Australia and New Zealand are two of the most rapidly secularizing countries in the world, much more quickly than Western Europe, for example. But the Pacific Islands are highly Christian, and I included the data here in this little table. Melanesia grew from 15% Christian to 93% Christian over the 20th century. Micronesia, 93% Christian. Polynesia, 96% Christian. Christianity is deeply embedded into Pacifica culture and life and family. So when we think of Oceania, it's not just Australia. There's a lot going on there besides from Australia. Christianity, of course, exists in its religious context. So these graphs show you each box is 1% of the population, the change over time of world religions. This is global from 1900 to 2075, where you can see that blue on the bottom is kind of the steady percentage of Christians. The next is green, which is Islam, which you can see has grown quite a lot over the 20th century. Next is Hinduism, which has remained rather stable. And then there were hardly any non-religious people in the year 1900. Pretty much the whole world was religious. And then we saw a huge increase of non-religion through the 70s because of communism and the Soviet Union and state-imposed atheism. But since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, we actually saw a bit of a rebound of religion worldwide. So in my estimation, the world is still a very religious place. Despite what some of my peers in New England here seem to think. If you break out of New England, the rest of the world is really religious. And Christianity and Islam have been on this trajectory for quite some time. Right now, we have Christians at 32%, Muslims at 25%. By 2075, Christians at 36%, Muslims at 33%. If you continue those lines into the future, past 2075, Islam will become the world's largest religion. Now, a lot of that is just because of demography. There's really only 3 ways a religion can grow at a national level. You're born into it, you convert into it, or you migrate into that country with your religion. On the flip side, there's only 3 ways a religion declines. You die, you leave the religion, or you leave your country. So from a demographic perspective, Muslims have more children than Christians do. So just from a birth rate perspective, it sounds very crude, but I'm a demographer, and this is what we talk about. From a demographic perspective, this is what will happen. But the future is never certain, and we are not fatalists, so we don't know for sure. And demography is not destiny. It's just trends and estimations. So let's look at a few important issues for Christians. Now, this is not every single issue that is important for Christians in the world. I always have to say that because someone says, you didn't say the thing that I think is the most important. These are just some things that are important for Christians. The first is history. Look at these incredible photos from our archives of Myanmar and Mexico, of women, by the way, encountering the faith, encountering the Virgin Mary in particular. History. With the shift of Christianity to the global south, we have so much more history to uncover. The history of Christianity did not go from Jerusalem through Europe to Boston. No. Christianity went east at the same time it went north. And there were more Christians in the Middle East than there were at Europe at some point. And actually, in the first 9 centuries of Christianity, it was a majority global south faith. And so now we're in the same demographic makeup of Christianity than we were in the first 9 centuries of the faith, with global south leading the way. So we need more history. We need to look at the indigenous encounter with missionaries more closely. We need to get the local perspective of those encounters. We need to work in different languages. We need to do more oral histories, more biographies. There's so much history that we need to uncover. Education. Education has always been a thing that Christians excel at, always. The connection of Christianity and mission and education has been central to the shift of Christianity to the global south. In some places, churches are literally upholding the public education system of countries where they are not able to do so. For example, in the DRC, the Catholic Church runs the healthcare and education sector of the DRC because they are just not able to do it themselves. The Catholic Church is running 95,000 elementary schools in the world. It's an incredible, incredible educational outreach that Christians have always excelled in, especially for the marginalized and especially for women and girls. Next is the climate crisis. In my work in world Christianity, I look for these global issues because I believe in the world Christianity hermeneutic, where what happens to Christians in one place around the world impacts Christians in another. And the climate crisis is arguably the most global issue that we are facing today, in the sense of what people do in one part of the world directly impacts those in another part of the world. So for example, those Pacific Island nations that are deeply, deeply Christian, where faith is embedded into society and family, some of those islands will not exist in 30 to 50 years because of the actions of large industrialized nations emitting carbon into the world and causing climate crisis and seawaters to rise. And who is the largest emitter of carbon ever over time? The United States, which is the country with the most Christians. This is a Christian issue, and it's a fundamentally global issue. Poverty and healthcare. Much like education, Christians are involved in all kinds of poverty alleviation efforts around the world, all kinds of healthcare-related issues. They run hospitals. Look at all the Adventist hospitals around the world, an incredible outreach. They run hospitals, they run women's clinics, they're running all kinds of services around the world to not just spread the faith, but to spread human flourishing is a key part of Christian witness. And of course, women. I can't not talk about women in world Christianity because there would be no shift of Christianity to the global south without women, which is a part of the story that often gets left out. Why? Because women were being trained as local evangelists to spread the gospel to their neighbors and friends as Bible women. They were passing the faith to their next generation. They weren't dealing in halls of power. They were dealing in relational networks, and that's where true religious change happens, is on the ground. Women as grassroots activists, women as evangelists, women are fundamentally running world Christianity at the grassroots level. But if they want to be in the halls of power, they should be able to do that too. Finally, ecumenism. Yeah, for women. Yeah, thanks, for women. Yeah, for women. Don't forget the women. So ecumenism, I want to tell you about, in 2015, a friend of mine, Todd Johnson and Cindy Wu, wrote this book, Our Global Families, Christians Embracing Common Identity in a Changing World. And in this book, they used history and data and trends to show that Christians belong to two global families, the human family and the Christian family. And they argue that despite all of the differences that exist on theology, denomination, language, race, ethnicity, Christians can affirm their membership in both the human family and the global family to work together for transforming the world for good. It's a beautiful book. But 15 years later, that world is a little harder to see than it was 15 years ago. Christians are technically more connected now than they ever have been, but I also feel like we're more separated and retreating into nationalisms where we're putting ourselves first instead of seeking the common good together, which was the vision of this book. I think everyone knows that polarization among religious and theological lines is increasing. And I travel quite a lot globally and talk to a lot of Christians from around the world, and I'm hearing it that a lot of our debates in the United States are being exported worldwide. That you have, for example, British Christians who rarely expressed political opinions are now arguing over American culture wars and identity politics. Samoan Christians are adopting Christian Zionism and other Western theo-political stances. Mongolian Christians, whenever I talk to Mongolians a lot, whenever you talk to Mongolians, they only want to hear about how to combat the cults. And so due to globalization, Christians have access to more information than ever about what life is like outside of our own contexts. And this should help us work across theological and ecclesiastical lines in a vision of a global family. But I'm asking a lot of questions if this global connectivity is actually making life better for Christians, or is it making it worse? But I think there's a lot of potential for the ecumenical movement to bring that light and life to push back against these trends that are seeking to divide. I think the next generation of Christians worldwide can see this vision most clearly. We need more data to look at the differences of religiosity among Gen Z, and that data is coming out slowly every day. But it seems that they have more creative approaches to issues of faith than even my generation, millennials. Gen Z are more likely to combine inspiration from religious and non-religious sources, and of course, they're the most online generation in history, which I think can be harnessed for good. I'm really optimistic that TikTok can be for good, because I do kind of love it. Gen Z generally is more justice-oriented, they're concerned about the environment, and they're looking for fresh ways to engage spiritual ideas. And I think these are really encouraging trends for the future of world Christianity and for ecumenism. And so I think we need to be talking to the youth more because they are thinking more creatively and across boundaries, perhaps a little more than the rest of us. So going back to our quote to consider from my friend Kima, Christianity exists between the universal claim of its message and the particular way of practicing the faith. And this is what I love most about world Christianity. It's unity and diversity, yes, but it's particularity and universality. You can have your theological opinions, you can have your interpretations of Scripture, you can have your history, you can have your political stances, but there is a universality that brings us together. The belief in Jesus Christ that brings us together, the self-identification as Christian that brings us together. And I think the diversity of world Christianity, frankly, is the thing that keeps me a Christian. I love it. I thrive in it. And I would love for the diversity to be embraced instead of to be feared. So I'm happy to open up for Q&A. My email is there if anyone has any questions. But I leave it to Matt, and he says 2 questions. So they better be good ones. Thank you.
Thank you for this lovely presentation. Is there a way that we can access this information to pass it along to our congregants and other people in our discussions?
Yeah, I'd be happy to send along a PDF of these slides. Just don't post them on the internet without my name or, it's like stuff ends up all over. But yes, I'd be happy to share this with you so you can use it as a resource in your networks. Thank you.
I know you study Christianity. I'm wondering about what is changing in the interfaith context as you see the diversity you talk about in Asia. Is there something that we can learn not only about Christian diversity, but about interfaith diversity and interfaith work?
Yeah. So I've done a lot of work on women in world Christianity, and a lot of the sociological literature shows that women are more likely to be boundary crossers than men. And one of those boundaries that women are often crossing are interfaith boundaries, because women, we have this common condition as women and things that we experience as women, no matter what our religious affiliation is, whether there's conflict and war where fathers and sons are out fighting and women are left more vulnerable, that unites them. And so they're willing to cross ethnic boundaries, religious boundaries, generational boundaries to do the work that needs to be done for the sake of human flourishing among their families and their communities. And so there's lots of incredible examples of women's interfaith, faith-based movements worldwide that are coming together to do the work that needs to be done. For example, there's a whole chapter in my book on women in peace building. And there's all these interreligious women peace building networks in areas of conflict that are doing just this. So yes, we have large global interfaith networks and they do the work that they do, but these women's networks are highly engaged by what's happening on the ground, and they're super effective. I recommend the movie Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Yeah. About Lema Gwobi ending a civil war in Liberia through a women's interfaith movement. That's what women can do in interreligious activism. We have time for one more question.
Thank you for the graphics. That was really helpful. And I had one question on the world religions 1900 to 2075. There was a long list of religions and then all those colored squares. But some of the religions, and in particularly, I was curious about the Jewish religion, you don't see the color in the graph. So I'm trying to understand the correlation between 1% of the population, which I guess is each box. So does that mean if you don't see the color, that there are fewer than 1% of that religion represented in any given era?
Yes. So if we go back to that graph in the 1900 column, there's one purple square for Judaism, which then goes away for the rest of the time because they are less than 1%. So remember how I said Christianity had one of the most dramatic transformations of any religion at any point in human history? Actually, Judaism had the most dramatic transformation of any religion in human history because of the Holocaust, the Shoah, and the destruction of European Jewry, and then the massive diaspora and migration movement, where now most Jews in the world live in the USA and in Israel. Of course, there are other populations, but Judaism actually had the most dramatic transformation of any religion over human history because of the Holocaust and then because of migration patterns post-Shoah. Yeah, thank you. All right. I think we are good. Thank you all. Please be in touch, and we'll send you the slides.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zurlo. 2-minute stretch break. 2 minutes. Be back in your seat in 2 minutes because we have a wonderful roundtable with former past presidents and board chairs of the NCC. Thank you.